After receiving an apartment in the center and 30 million, I unexpectedly ended up in the hospital. While my husband was whispering with the doctor, the orderly passed me a note. Don't fall asleep, run. And before we continue the story, write in the comments what your name is and what city you are from. Glossy champagne bags and burap boxes. Igor quickly opened the mounted during the construction of a metal door. And Vera, barely having time to take off her leather gloves, followed him into the space that still smelled of damp concrete, but already belonged to them. 5-room penthouse on Mitninskaya, glass walls from floor to ceiling, panoramic view of the evening city where illuminated spires and bridges were reflected in the still damp from the recent snowstorms on the asphalt. The word 30 to 30 million echoed in her stomach with a slight hum, credited to the joint account yesterday after the nervous but victorious signing of the deed of sale of the sharefather's business. As if in this number there lived fireworks, ready at any second shoot their calves in the direction of anyone who dares to doubt their success. Igor flicked the switch of the temporary lamp, and a faint yellow circle of light flickered on rough ceiling. A couple more months, and here the elevator will go straight to the living room, as we dreamed of, he said with a proud smile, hiding the fatigue in the corners of his lips. Vera answered laughter, joyful, ringing, a little disbelievingly crazy. She was tired of the long days filled with ritual handshakes with notaries, realtors, and bankers, but even the fatigue seemed accelerated by the heat inside the chest. Finally they did it, as Igor said, as if it were a sports record. In the glasses was not cheap crack, a gift from a partner. The bubbles rose up, just as crazy as their mood. Vera sniffed the wine, caught the notes ripe apple and honey, let the drink coat her tongue. She felt triumphant, but somewhere deep under the solar plexus a tiny spark was simmering, a spark of anxiety. The housing I had dreamed about for 15 years had fallen so quickly, and such a sum that would have been enough for a decade of peaceful plans before. Aren't you scared? She asked in a half voice, watching the purple-gold sunset fade over the city. Igor chuckled. It would be scary to continue sharing interest with your cousins, I assure you. And now we are free, Veruja. His palm fell on her waist, as if anchoring her in a new world, where the lights hummed through the glass, and behind them was a cement wall, which they called the future media zone. Vera finally allowed herself to relax and hug her husband. At that moment, it seemed any questions about the price of such a leap, about whether money will ruin their love, let them wait, because today is the day to celebrate. She woke up early in the morning. In the concrete box, the echo of one's own step sounded loud, as if the void was erecting walls of sound. The foreman Alexei's team dragged sheets of plasterboard, drilled, cursed in a low voice. Vera, armed with a tape measure and a tablet, ran around the rooms, marking where they would be sockets, where the built-in closet is, where the console under the TV is. And these prosaic actions were intertwined with the real delight. A girl from a panel house. Growing up among the smell of old carpets from her grandmother's apartments were now deciding whether to choose marble or onyx for the kitchen island. A whole team of men with instruments looked back at her with respect. Igor was already pressing the phone to his ear, moving to the window, and quickly minted phrases. Yes, you see, we agree, but only on condition of a deferred payment. Vera turned around and nodded, as if encouraging, although she noticed her husband's eyes were darting around and his fingers were nervously tapping on his windowsill. When they went down to get to the temporarily rented apartments on Petrogradka, Igor for the first time did not discuss the color of the granite. Business, he said briefly, glancing at the smartphone screen, where the icon of a new messenger was blinking, which only he had access to. Vera tried to believe that business is a normal attribute of capital growth, but something barely perceptible, like a draft, ran through between them in the elevator cabin. The following days were a whirlwind. Igor he went to the bank, to the contractor, to negotiations with potential tenants of the commercial floor. In the evenings he came back excited but agitated. Talked about exchange rates, about that we need to lock in profits here and take out a bridge loan there. He spoke too quickly. His voice faded into ringing falsetto. And the favorite words, let's watch a movie together, suddenly gave in place in fin terminology. Vera, having taken control of the construction, did not immediately notice that she saw her husband all a couple of hours a day, and when she noticed, she got scared. One day she found herself thinking that if there was a third force in his life, someone or something that needed his attention more than me. She asked question right at dinner, holding a fork over a plate of pasta. Igor, I miss you. I lack of live conversation. Where are you burning? He looked up as if he had just that came out from behind the glass wall of traffic. Sorry, baby. We're at the threshold. A unique deal for subletting half a floor is the key to recouping the renovation. Be patient for a little while. Okay. And then he added, smiling with the corner of his lips, for the sake of I'm trying to help us. Vera could only nod, but a premonition ached in her chest. The turns of speech changed. Now he said I, not we. In the midst of January frost, Vera arrived at the site, deciding to personally oversee the delivery of the elevator equipment. She greeted the fitters warmly, gave them coffee, checked the invoices and decided to go up the stairs. Because the electricity was out, the elevator didn't go to the upper floors. The echo of footsteps crashed down on the walls again, and suddenly the world flashed white. At first it seemed to her that someone suddenly turned on a powerful spotlight. Then this light inside the head melted and turned into a dull ringing. I thought I should sit down, but my legs wouldn't obey me anymore. The cold concrete touched my cheek. The metallic ringing of Alexei's voice rang in Vera Sergeyevna's ears. And then darkness. The noise of the wheels of the Polyeolium hospital corridor cut into consciousness, as if each spoke penetrated into the temple. Vera came to her senses, opening eyes, and the world rocked like a boat. The persistent smell of chlorine mixed with rubber gloves. Someone leaned over and asked if my stomach hurt or if I felt sick. Igor's hand seemed to be pressing her shoulder, but it didn't feel like his own, but like plastic. Because my husband's voice was coming from somewhere above. Hold on, Vera, I'm here. I'll settle it. She was overwhelmed. She could hear the temperature creeping up in her body, and it seemed even the floors are knocking with cold. In the emergency room, the general practitioner, pronouncing the diagnosis through a mask, he said, probable toxic reaction, possibly a combination of dehydration and chemical fumes. We need to hospitalize. Igor nodded too quickly, even with relief. Vera tried to object, but her tongue seemed to be glued to the roof of my mouth. The first frightening thought clearly echoed. What if it's not dehydration at all? And if someone, but the rest of the phrase drowned in the noise of the heart rate monitor. On an early winter night, the ward was lit only a narrow strip of corridor light seeping through the half-open door. Vera lay on her side, afraid to move. It seemed that any sound would cause pain in her temples. She tried to fall asleep, but the medicine poured in through a dropper gave only a cottony numbness, bringing no peace. Suddenly the rustle of footsteps and muffled voices were heard. She held her breath. Her husband spoke quietly, but the words cut through the silence like a blade. While she was on a drip, we'll get it done. The head of the department coughed and asked, are you sure we'll make it before exit? Igor said, the main thing is that she doesn't rise tomorrow. We signed power of attorney and that's it. The money is needed urgently. Vera's chest was burned as if there splashed ice. She bit her lip to keep from screaming, and realized, the body, tied to a pin with a transparent bag of solution, turned out to be an anchor, holding her in place, and the soul was already rushing about, searching exit. When the door creaked again, the sound of retreating footsteps could be heard. Her heart was beating so loudly that it resembled a battle drum. She thought, this is either a monstrous misunderstanding or betrayal. After, perhaps, an hour of time blurred. A soft beam of the duty lamp crept into the ward. A young orderly, a thin guy with a fringe of bangs, carefully stepped towards the bed. Vera thought he wanted to check sensors on the monitor, but he suddenly leaned over, as if adjusting the edge of the blanket, and a folded square slipped into his palm. He whispered, hide, and went out without even looking into her eyes. Vera, trembling, unfolded the note. In the semi-darkness she made out 2 short sentences. Don't fall asleep, run. The letters were written quickly, the ink stain spread out, but the words cut more vividly than a scalpel. She felt the blood pushed her hard up into her throat. Outside in the hallway the light went out. Night was coming her rights. So, clutching the grey, rough duvet cover with her fists, she sat until dawn. Every time the nurse opened the ampoule of sedative, Vera closed her eyes and quietly asked, I feel better, let's do it later. Forehead was damp, his temples throbbed, but weakness retreated before fear. Under the morning when the pale sky outside the hospital window was tinted with a diluted peach, she finally decided, to trust or not to trust the notes, luxury. The main thing now is not dissolve in the sleepy syrup of other people's injections. She clutched the small piece of paper in her fist like an amulet, and whispered to herself, I won't fall asleep. The morning light barely filtered through jelly, broke into dull yellow stripes on the ward. And Vera thought that these stripes looked like prison bars, only drawn by the sun. She lay under a grey blanket, holding onto the metal rail of the bed with one hand and a small crumpled piece of paper with the other that read "Don't fall asleep, run," which she managed to hide in the pillowcase at night. It seems to be an ordinary toxicology department. 2 cabinets, one glass with bandages, the second with drawers registration forms. The square of the window, the devices, signalling with a steady beep. And Nurse Natalia is always equally neat, briefly indifferent, as if sterility itself had come down from poster of the sanitary service. But it was her measured confidence with which she at every opportunity she spoke later or according to protocol it was not allowed. She made the surrounding space sticky, isolated him from the rest of the world more tightly than an iron door. Vera tried to ask for a phone number, said that she needed to call her mother, that she was simply scared. Natalia smiled with her round eyes, pulling on her rubber gloves, and without a shadow irritated, she replied, "My husband will bring it in the evening." The doctor asked not to disturb her for now. With these words, the nurse lowered the display with the dropper a little lower, blocking the monitor where the pulse rhythms were running, and left, smoothly carrying away rustling of the robe starch. Vera wanted to shout after him, "I'm not a child." But her voice sat down treacherously from the night dryness in the throat. She was left alone with a uniform drop of solution, which beat the second beat, forcing the brain to count the time instead of resting. The day dragged on like a thick syrup. A couple of hours later Igor appeared at the door. He entered with a bouquet of white and with his mouth, as if for a photo report from the advertising brochure-loving husband, but in his other hand he carried a leather folder. Approaching bed, he sat on the edge of the mattress, so that the springs creaked slightly and casually placed his fingers on a palm. Vera felt a chill. These fingers belonged to body that she knew every freckle. But now there were thick layers between them. Unsaid. Igor spoke kindly, but quickly, as if he was afraid to forget the text. Like, the bank requires to clarify the signatures on the powers of attorney. They say, it's nothing complicated, just sign, to start the money for repairs, otherwise the delay in building materials will be expensive. He took out sheets of paper from the folder, pointed place with Parker's pen. Vera asked, barely audible, to pretend weak, "Why can't we wait until she's discharged?" Igor, avoiding her gaze, replied that the deadlines are tight, and the credit holidays will only be given if the documents are sent today. His voice broke into a soft pressure. "Come on, darling, I'm here. I'll take care of everything." Vera took the pen, but in her head the night rang, while she was on a drip. "We'll draw up." And she asked, "And why here clause on the right of signature of third parties?" Igor slightly flared up with his ears, said that this is a standard formulation, like, everything is for the sake of convenience. She hesitated, spent with a rod on the air signature, without touching the paper. "I want Marina to see this," she finally exhaled. Igor winced, but smiled tensely. "Well, of course, but you know how busy your Marina is. We don't want to lose a week." He rose up, put his arm around her shoulders, and Vera felt the scent of his expensive cologne, but along with it the subtle taste of the cigarettes he promised to quit a year ago. She lied, "My hand is shaking, let's do it tonight." Igor put his signatures on the shelf at the head of the bed, kissed her temple and left, leaving behind the smell of tobacco and rosemary. The duty shift moved to evening shift, and Sasha came with the shift. That same orderly with the tousled bangs and with the clear eyes of a frontline puppy. He checked the 4, connected a new 1 bottle of solution and, clicking one click after another, he quietly said, as if he was simply commenting on the readings, "Don't sleep today." Vera barely moved her lips. "Why?" Sasha, pretending to study the paper ECG tape, answered quickly. "A year ago, a woman was lying in this same ward after construction poisoning. She was also kept on 4s, asked not to worry, and then suddenly they diagnosed me with acute heart failure." He admitted that he was working as an intern at the time and noticed that the patient was not woken up after evening drip, although according to the protocol it is necessary to check the pressure. The management ordered to write the opposite. After death, that story was hushed up. Sasha's eyes sparkled. "I don't want that to happen again." He added, blushing under his mask, that he didn't anyway, so what, when today in the doctor's office the order was given not to disturb the patient from the 15th until morning, he realized the situation was repeating itself. Vera listened, and a slight tremor in her hands was replaced by a chilling calm. No longer paranoia, a logical chain, folding into a poisonous garland of facts. She remembered the joint account. 6 months ago, Igor tried to persuade her to combine their finances, explaining that this would save on commissions and joint investments. This is what all modern couples do. Vera agreed because trusted. Now the thought of this account stuck out like a piece of ice under the ribs. An idea flashed in her head. She needed data from the bank. She asked Sasha to get it for her phone, but he said that only the nurse on duty had access to the locker with personal belongings. Then Vera, having figured out that visitors can enter through the pass system until 9 p.m., asked to find a way to fit in the guest list of her friend Marina, a lawyer in corporate law. Sasha nodded, promising to solve it at the entrance due to the fact that the security guard sometimes needs to print out a certificate for the accounting department. Marina showed up the next day disguised as her cousin. She was wearing a checkered down jacket, her face half covered by a scarf. An ordinary visitor, tired of traffic jams. Sasha quickly conducted her into the bed block, and Vera, feeling her heart beating wildly, met friend with a forced smile. They spoke in whispers, hiding words in common phrases about well-being and analyses, so that if someone is eavesdropping, they will only hear a household melody. In the ones thrown over bed brochures about postoperative nutrition, Marina held a printout from the bank. Igor requested a full joint account statement, and they saw something terrible. The movement of 30 million already marked as withdrawal to a Transit corporate account. In addition, the credit department prepared a mortgage contract in the name of a certain Oksana Lagina, 27 years old. The property is apartments in an elite Petrovsky Fort quarter. Marina pointed her finger at the scan of Igor's signature on the application. Vera took a deep breath. Her husband was always annoyed by the fact that her signature looked like on the grove of violins. She saw here someone else's calligraphy, strict, direct, male. They asked her to put her own grove of ants. Disgust rose in her throat. The money earned by her family's labor would be pumped to a woman whose name Vera hears it for the first time now. And it's even worse. The husband who kissed her hands yesterday did it deliberately to persuade him to sign the power of attorney. Marina softly touched her friend's shoulder, reminding her to hold on. She whispered that she would give lawyer's request. But the main thing is that faith must not get out of the control of consciousness. If it falls into a deep sleep, signature can be obtained without her knowledge, fingers can be blown and initials can be added instead of her. Vera nodded, and in this a flash of memories happened in an instant. She suddenly wanted to understand how from romantic dates in Gorky Park and nightly conversations about the meaning of life, they came to such an abyss. In memory surfaced long ago. Even as a student, Igor hated it when teachers cheated his successors on his rich parents. Although his parents were just engineers in the provinces, he then only dreamed of proving everyone. When fate brought them together at a business conference, he admired their sure-footed ability to convince investors, but at the same time he was jealous of her natural ease, of the way she was able to win people's sympathies. It seemed to them that they complement each other. She is the bridge, he is the foundation. But there were cracks in the foundation, the desire to be recognized at any cost, not to suffer defeats. Vera remembered how one day, returning from a banquet, he drunkenly cried that no one would believe that I myself achieved. And she stroked his hair and promised, "Our success is your success." Now she looked at the extract and understood that the desire to prove had crossed the line and had become an illness that required others' victims. My heart was breaking. On the one hand, the memories of the man who drew funny scribbles on both of them to cheer her up. On the other hand, a cold, calculating predator, ready for meanness. Vera felt for the first time that the past and the present may not be reconciled. In the evening, closer to 10 o'clock, when the lights in the corridor were burning at half power, Igor returned. This time without flowers, only with the same papers and a small blister of pills in a clear plastic bag. Staggered, probably had a drink to dull his nervous tremors. In the tone of a caring doctor, he said that Dr. Krylov recommended a new soft sleeping pill. "You're exhausted. You need to pass out. You'll feel great tomorrow." He took out a mug, poured water from cooler. Vera noticed that her husband's hands were shaking. She licked her dry lips, hoping that Sasha was on duty nearby. Meanwhile, Igor took a white one out of the bag. An oval tablet without markings, put it on the table. "Only half a tablet," he said, but broke it into a whole. And it became clear to Vera that her intentions did not coincide with words. At that moment the door opened slightly. Light and Sasha's shadow seeped into the corridor. The young orderly approached with a formal smile. "Excuse me." Checking the 4. He glanced at Pill, and then at Igor. A shadow of suspicion touched his face, but he did not. He shuddered, took the bottle of saline solution and, as if by accident, knocked the bag of water over onto the table with his elbow. The tablet bounced onto the floor. Sasha squatted down, picked it up and, holding it between his fingers, subject of the study, asked, "Is this for sleep? We have a strict list of drugs." Igor immediately turned around tough. "I talked to the manager. Everything was agreed upon." Sasha shrugged, but in his eyes professional curiosity flared up. "It's strange. It doesn't look like a register. It's possible look at the composition?" Igor put his hands behind his back, muttering about personal agreements. Sasha apologized but walked out the door, and Vera heard him quickly say something to the head nurse. A minute later returned with a boat container for prohibited substances, demonstratively put a pill in it, closed the lid on filling. Igor turned pale. "Why the circus?" Sasha answered quietly but firmly. "The drug is not labeled. Without a description of pharmacodynamics. Risk to the patient. There is questions?" After that, Igor stood for another minute, as if assessing the battlefield, then abruptly turned to Vera. "I wanted the best for you." She looked into his eyes from under her raised eyebrows and whispered, "Good -30 million." He stepped towards her, but Sasha appeared again, at the door, like a guardian angel, and announced that visiting hours were over. Igor, gritting his teeth, grabbed the folder, crumpled the papers, and said, "I'll be back tomorrow." Think about it. The door closed with a bang, and only after that Vera allowed herself to exhale. Sasha came up, took his gloves out of his pocket, and carefully I broke the second half of the tablet and used a paper file to transfer it to the lamp. Under the fine light of the phosphorescent lampshade, the white powder shone with a blue tint. It was my Borbidil, the old heavy barbituravir mixture. A full dose, and the breathing will fail. Vera had them fingers. Sasha looked straight into her eyes. "Do you believe now?" She nodded, and the tears she had been holding back for 2 hours burst out, not because of weakness, but from the realization that the world was shaking. But still found a point of support in the person of this skinny guy who risks his job for someone else's life. Night embraced the hospital again. In the corridor, the lamps were dimmed halfway, and long gleams of shadow stretched out like black snakes. Vera lay awake, aware that the fight starts tomorrow. Lawyer Marina prepares an official request to the bank. Sasha promised to obtain a copy of the appointment log confirming the absence of this sleeping pill. In the protocol, Vera, I felt weak in body and strong in spirit at the same time. I wanted to repair my body, but my spirit was now woke up. In the cracks of the ceiling she imagined a weather front rushing break through the roof. The storm is brewing and she must meet it with open eyes. In Sasha left a small digital thermometer in his robe pocket, saying, "If at night come with an injection, hide it under your armpit. Pretend that you've already measured it. The main thing is don't fall asleep." She clutched the thermometer in her palm and returned her gaze to the window, where glass-wet black streets wandered rare headlights of cars. In these headlights the promise of a new battle was reflected. Vera whispered barely audibly, "I won't fall asleep." And the foredrip continued to methodically count the seconds until dawn, when the balance of power would change forever. Twilight only seemed like silence. In fact, the hospital lived a nightly, sinister life of whispers, fans, and the neon hum. Vera lay motionless, breathing evenly, as if succumbed to anesthesia. But sparks of tension danced under her eyelids. Everything was calculated, every breath, every heartbeat. Sasha, who was on duty in the corridor, warned Nurse Natalia that the patient was finally sleeping steadily, showed the pressure chart he had drawn in advance, and received a nod. There will be no outside visits until 6 a.m. In this signal, a nod without distinction, was salvation. As soon as the shadows behind the glass the door retreated, Sasha slid inside, carefully unfastened the empty one from the rack bottle of saline solution, hooked the hose to a pocket bottle of water. For needed only as decoration. He helped Vera up, wrapped the hose around her brushes so that the needle seemed like a venariality, and then he rolled out a small crab cart from the pantry, slow-moving, without creaking. Vera sat down, covered herself with a blanket, took a deep breath the stale air of the ward, as if saying goodbye to the cage, and nodded. The wheels started moving. Sasha walked behind the head of the gurney. He held the stand with one hand and opened it with the other. Doors, jamming the latches with his finger. Every meter of the corridor flickered with flashing lights, and this strobe light was cutting into their nerves, but they held on. On the landing, where the motion sensors were triggered late, Marina was waiting for them. The strict beige robe was stolen from the closet medical staff. On her chest was someone else's badge with a blurry photo. She nodded, pulled out pocket tablet and a small reticular lamp, a pointer. 3 months ago she defended a client from raiders. Today I defended a friend, playing intrigue on foreign field. Vera was surprised at how firm her lips looked without lipstick. The elevator to the service floor was turned off, so Sasha suggested a route through a tunnel corridor where the archives were kept and written off drugs. As they descended to the first level of the basement, they listened their own steps, catching their breath, trying not to look at the chapel at the end of the corridor. It was not needed at all esotericism, but the smell of wax coming from there reminded us of the fragility of life. Stronger than any diagnosis. In the depths of the basement labyrinth there was a plastic accordion of archive doors. The lock was activated by a code, but Sasha had seen how night pharmacists bypass the system over the years of working part-time. One presses the keys, the other leans an empty plastic cup against the speaker, listening to the snout. He repeated the trick, put stethoscope, caught the clicks. A dull click, the door gave in. The smell of paper, peroxide, and mold hit her nose. Vera, shaking with adrenaline, rolled the gurney along racks. Cardboard folders are dated in dusty windows with a marker pen 2016 to 2019. It was necessary 2025. They found the Department of Financial and Medical Commission's dark blue spine. Decision on temporary incapacity. Marina ran her eyes over the pages, and the light of her lantern darted like a bloodhound. Signatures of the head of Krylov were adjacent to the names assigned to the new Babylon Real Estate Company, the founders of which were the offshore Igor and Stat Limited and a certain Luzhina development. Vera almost dropped the lantern. This is the name of the same girl from the bank statement. The protocol stated that the patient temporarily loses the ability to make decisions. Recommended, issue a power of attorney to a close relative or guardian. Below is a template power of attorney form with the dates already filled in. Sasha swore quietly. Marina whispered, "What's with this paper?" The prosecutor's office will cling to Krylovo like a pit bull. But one protocol is not enough. We need direct connections. They started to leaf through the folders further and found a report from the internal commissions. The expenses for the real estate group's consulting services were written off on behalf of the clinic, and the signatures of the responsible doctors were carried out by the same secretary. Marina photographed each page, placing her hand under it to stop herself from shaking. Suddenly the door slammed in the hallway. Everything inside Faith rushed to the throat. Steps heavy, measured. This is how a person walks, confident that he has nothing to fear. A figure in a dark robe appeared in the doorway of the archive, the manager Krylov, tall, flabby, like a breadcrumb. He immediately understood who he was seeing. His eyes converged into sharp points and dots. His booming voice drowned out beeps of devices. "I expected, Vera Sergeyevna, that you were smart, but not thought you'd go straight to the paper." Vera turned slowly. Her palm clenched for stand. Krylov stepped closer, and behind him was the silhouette of a security guard. He spoke quietly, like a tutor to a capricious child. 90 of patients do not mind it, so that their relatives can manage the assets while they are being treated. You still recover. Get your percentage. Husband gets capital. Clinic, sponsorship, research, and I calm down. Take a step back and leave these documents. He extended his hand as if begging. Vera recalled sleepless nights, flashes lamps over the bed, a barbiturate tablet, a bank printout glass. She answered evenly, almost whisper. My health is not a line item on your budget. I am not a percentage. Krylov sighed, like an offended teacher, and said, You won't be able to keep the money anyway. Igor has already confirmed the transfer. Join or leave empty-handed. Behind Marina quietly picked up a phone, started recording, and pressed her finger to her lips. Krylov continued, You have fragile pressure, every stress, risk. I could prescribe mild sedation. You would wake up in 24 hours. Everything would be over, but I give you a chance. Sign voluntarily, get a share. Vera felt a strange feeling rising inside her. A mixture of pity and rage. Pity for the one who sells someone else's life and rage from the price they were offering her. She slowly stepped forward, and the fork creaked like a rusty sword. You know, doctor, she said, feeling the voice rings. I've trusted people in white coats all my life. Today you explained that the robe could just be a screen. Take your screen. And without looking away, she abruptly pulled the needle out of her vein. A drop of blood splashed onto the floor like a scarlet accent. Krylov recoiled. The guard rushed forward, but Sasha, appearing from the darkness, flashed a metal handle the rolling brake. It locked the wheels and the guard stumbled, lost his balance. The light flickered. Marina took advantage of the second, turned on the emergency beacon on the remote control by the door, the one that signals a fire. In all, a red siren flashed in the corridors. Krylov cursed, but had to retreat to the shutdown panel. Vera shouted. Her voice broke, but it sounded firm, that the copies of the protocols were already in cloud. The link was sent to journalists. Marina added, and to the bank, which holds your credits. The echo swallowed their words, but the meaning crashed into the air like wedge. Taking advantage of the confusion, Sasha helped Vera take off the forecover, put on her a dark jacket prepared in advance. Together they rushed to the elevator. The siren pounded the brain. Red the light danced on the walls. The main hall smelled of ozone. The system turned on smoke removal. People in robes rushed about like white ghosts. Vera felt the pulse in temples, but the thought that the documentary clanking of their chains was already giving strength crumble. 4 months, Krylov and Igor's quiet scheme collapsed in minutes. But Igor was waiting for them at the elevators. He stood with his legs wide apart, like a barrier. Eyes filled with adrenaline. Vera froze. Sasha tensed up. Marina held the phone in her hand. Igor was screaming, drowning out the alarm. You're not, you see, darling. You're weak. I'm taking it all on myself. This is our chance, and your leading screamed at himself. He turned to Sasha. Move away. This family. Vera took a step, felt the cold of the floor through her slippers, said, You are selling my life for a mortgage to another woman. Igor flared up, tried to grab her by the elbow, but Marina stood between the phone with the lens turned. Your words are being written, dear. Come on, explain. Is she weak? He pulled his hand back. The elevator, the service one, beeped. The door opened. Vera turned to Igor. She caught his eyes for another second. The siren's reflection, red, furious, and whispered, Goodbye. The door closed right on his outstretched palm. At the last moment she saw how in his eyes it wasn't rage that flashed across her husband's face, but the emptiness of loss, the very one he feared all my life. The elevator jerked downwards. When the number one flashed above the door, Vera, for the first time in days, she allowed herself a short laugh. Not from joy, but from relief. They slipped away, and left behind a cracked pattern of alien lies, growing like a web. The first grey glow of dawn barely touched the glass canopy of the emergency room when Sasha, breathing heavily, rolled the stretcher out through the service corridor where yesterday's smell of antiseptic was replaced by the burn of burning wiring from siren that had been turned on the day before. Vera, covered by a dark jacket, clutched the handrail. So hard that my knuckles turned white, and I could hear my heart beating out a rhythm, coinciding with the fraction of his heel's polynomial. And, it seemed, in each blow pulse is the countdown to release. Outside the air is wet asphalt and ozone. The winter haze had lightened slightly in the gap between the houses, and this first morning colour was like a thinner strip of hope that stretched from the horizon straight to their rolling cart. At the porch there was a duty car, a fast old Ford, dozing with its doors open, as if it was waiting specifically for them. The paramedic, yawning, muttered something about a false fire alarm, but Sasha referred to transferring a patient to another clinic, handed him a hastily signed form, and they went inside, slammed the door, turning off the rest of the hospital hum. The ambulance siren squealed, cutting through the coolness of the empty streets, and Vera, looking through the rear window, saw how the facade clinics recedes, like a scene from a bad dream that has finally stopped holding her by the throat. Marina was already sitting in front next to the driver, holding the bag to his knees. Inside the bag is a flash drive, which at night downloaded all the photographs of the protocols and audio with Krylov's confession. As soon as the wheels turned onto the embankment, she took out her phone and, without wasting any time, sent the file to a messenger of a friend who works as an editor at a morning news channel, adding a dry note. Corruption. Clinic plus bank. Exclusive. Broadcast 7:30. The answer came instantly to one emoji in the form of an exploding bomb. A copy was then sent to the bank's internal control department. The subject of the letter was urgent. Risk reputational losses were calculated with surgical precision. Such letters are opened first. The machine dive gift jumped out onto the embankment, and the city, like a huge organism, was just waking up. The bridges were still open. The windows, the stalls were jingling with chains. Rare passers-by in hoods were hurrying to the metro. Siren extinguished and flared up again. The ambulance maneuvered between the orange traffic cones, and each flash of blue the lighthouse was reflected in the wet asphalt. As a symbol of purification, the world expanded, straightened his shoulders, and, for the first time in many days, it became easy to breathe. Exactly at 7:28 minutes, when the car stopped near a private diagnostic clinic, the TV channel's press service employee put the story on air live. The screen was in the bank's lobby, where he was just entering. Deputy Director for Risks flashed close-up of the manager Krylov, muttering about the percentage of silence, then the new Babylon logo, then the inscription patients in hostages of capital. At the same time, the bank scoring system automatically checked the flag for the operation stop, and the transfer of 30 million hung like a dragonfly stuck to amber. Igor, who was already waiting for confirmation in the office over a cup of espresso, received 2 lightning bolts on his phone. The deal is put on hold and a link to the broadcast. He tried to call Vera. 1 to 10 times there was no answer. And at this time Vera was undergoing a CT scan in a new clinic. There they gave her a glucose drip, did an electrocardiogram, and the doctor, pushing his glasses up onto his forehead, said, "You only have mild dehydration and fatigue. No toxic damage is visible." These words became final confirmation that the previous diagnoses were just a tool in the scheme. By midday, the city was already buzzing. The news spread. Social networks were filled with screenshots of the correspondence. And on the top floor of the penthouse, where it still smelled of concrete dust, construction crews were ordered to suspend work. Vera, dressed in jeans and a black diver, she went up there alone. She wanted to take a look at the space that yesterday seemed like a dream, and today a silent witness to betrayal. In the center of the future living room stood 2 folding chairs and a box of tools. This was where the Igor came for the editing schedule. He appeared quietly, without knocking, as if a tired thief. His face was drawn, there were grey shadows under his eyes, but his voice tried to maintain a confident tone. "I did everything to speed up the project. You and I agreed. Apartment, passive income, freedom. I wasn't going to lose you, you're just too suspicious, and deals require speed." He stepped toward her, his hands extended, his palms upward, as if asking to shake hands. Vera felt how in her chest a hot wave of resentment rises, but the voice was calm. "Freedom is when at night I am given barbiturates so that I sign a power of attorney. Love is interest from the body." Igor sighed, sat down on the aluminum box, buried his face in his palms. "I wanted proof that I am worthy of you. These walls, everything. No one should have suffered. Everything was under control." Vera sat down opposite, looking out the blue window where the spire of the cathedral rose. "Your dignity was measured in squares, zeros, alien fates. And mine is whether I wake up in the morning. I choose to wake up." She got it from the folder, a yellow envelope, put it on the edge of the drawer. Inside was a notice of divorce, a copy of the lawsuit to the clinic, notification of the establishment of the Right to Stay Awake Charitable Foundation, where all 30 million go, with a note on the rehabilitation of patients, victims, medical and financial manipulations. Igor, reading, lost the color of his voice, his lips trembled. "Will you take everything?" She replied, "I'm just getting my life back." He tried to object, but the words dissolved in the emptiness of the concrete walls. The chair wobbled and fell. From the box the screws fell out and rang like illusions being torn apart. Vera rose. I put on my coat and remembered how Sasha had whispered that night, "Don't fall asleep, live." The phrase now rang in the air like a bat. She repeated it out loud, looking her husband. "I live, Igor. And you?" He didn't answer, he just watched him go, until the glass elevator door didn't close. Marina was waiting for her downstairs with Bag's documents. They silently went outside, and Vera felt a light snow, the first for this warm winter. It melted on the cheeks, as if erasing the traces of tears. Spring has come unnoticed, having melted the ice on the Neva, forcing the chestnut trees to bend their heavy branches kidneys. 3 months later Vera was sitting on a bench in a fruit-drinking field, holding a simple white letter. The mother of Alexandra Konovalova, the same woman who died in the clinic a year ago, thanked fund for financial assistance to the youngest son, a schoolboy. The paper smelled of ink and cocoa. Apparently, the author wrote it in the evening in the kitchen, trying to find the words. Vera reread the phrase about the restored justice and felt a strange lightness. As if she had moved a boulder, revealing the path to the family. The gravel creaked. She looked up. Sasha was already walking along the alley. Without a hospital gown, in jeans and a dark green jacket. On his shoulder is a backpack with emblem of the medical university. He smiled sheepishly. First year. Evening. Catching up with a dream. Vera extended her palm to congratulate. Fingers touched his fingers. The touch was a little longer than necessary for a formal handshakes. The wind swayed the branches, scattering shadows along the path. Sasha sat down nearby, told how he passed anatomy yesterday, how he wants to become a doctor who will never allow bureaucracy strangle a man. Their laughter, quiet but pure, intertwined with the twittering of the morning starlings. The sun rose higher, and in the soft golden light Faith covered eyes. But it was not sleep or fatigue. She listened to the wind running between column of the Mikhailovsky castle, carries the smell of wet grass and freedom. The same wind touched her hair, as if reminding her of the days of fear behind her. The words on the scrap of paper that once saved her in the hospital room has now changed its meaning. Don't fall asleep, run, has turned into trust life, feeling its every move. She took a deep breath, allowed the waves to close, and the world did not disappear, but blossomed brighter. The noise of the city, the steps people, the warmth of someone's palm nearby, everything formed into a new melody. It is more I wasn't afraid to close my eyes because I knew I would wake up not in a trap, but in a spacious morning where every breath proof of her strength. The wind slid across her face like a light kiss from the future, and Vera smiled, keeping her eyes closed but her heart wide open to the path that was just beginning. The following months formed a long, almost indivisible strip of everyday life, filled not with May storms of emotions, like the previous dramatic days, but with painstaking work on restoration justice, and each week brought its results. The prosecutor's office approved the indictment. The defendants in the case were the director Krylov, his 2 deputies, the clinic's chief accountant and 3 employees. Banks that signed the accelerated transit transfers. In a separate folder, investigators highlighted materials concerning Igor. He was prosecuted under the article on fraud on an especially large scale and causing serious harm to the patient's health. But since Vera managed to escape from the barbiturates in time, the wording of the assassination attempt was excluded, but added illegal use of a power of attorney. The court hearings lasted 12 sessions. Vera gave her testimony calmly, in detail, without omitting a single clarification about the documents signed in a semi-conscious state. State of the papers. Opponents' lawyers tried to put pressure on the emotional component, saying that the spouses were worried crisis, but the judge, a woman in a strict robe with a shiny grey tail, did not allow the process to be diverted towards family troubles. The verdict for Krylov 6 years in a general regime penal colony, deputy for 4, financiers, 3 suspended. Igor was given a 5-year suspended sentence and ordered to pay compensation to the Right to Vigilance Fund. When he heard these lines, sitting in the courtroom, 2 rows away from Faith, shoulders sank, as if under the attractive weight of the impossibility of his former self-confident posture, and in his eyes flashed the realization. Sometimes the punishment is not Basel, but bars off shame, which forever remain inside. The foundation, meanwhile, has evolved from a symbolic gesture into powerful public structure. Over the summer, he financed the rehabilitation of 17 former patients of problematic clinics, conducted 2 educational campaigns on people's rights to informed consent, and by autumn became a partner medical ombudsman for the Northwest. Vera worked almost 7 days a week, not from painful desire to drown out the pain. She somehow quickly freed herself from the former wound, and from the joy of the matter. Each letter thanks, every video where people after long months of horizontal life rise for the first time with a walker, charged with an inner light stronger than any sun. There were days of fatigue, and on such evenings she returned not to the abandoned concrete box on Mitneskaya, which was soon put on display auction as an object of bankruptcy, and in a small rented studio on the Petrograd side. High windows, white brick, a palm tree in the skating rink and a long floor-length tulle that was stirred by the wind never. There were no ghosts of the past here. Here she learned to live with transparency, where everything is in sight, and not a single thing weighs down on unpaid loans. Sasha, who became as a medical university student, he managed to combine duty as an orderly in a municipal hospital and evening lectures and volunteering at the foundation. Sometimes they crossed paths in the empty office corridors after work, putting informational brochures for the upcoming campaign into bags. And Vera caught myself with the desire to linger longer on his hands, which were deftly sorting papers and at the same time involuntarily touched her fingers, as if casually checking whether she was there. They rarely talked about feelings. Micro-movements were enough for them. A cup of cappuccino, left on her desk early in the morning with the caption, "Don't fall asleep, live." And the fragment of an anatomical book he had copied diagrams where he wrote down Pasternak's lines about the courage to live. Each such small the message became a thread of trust that held their new world together. Investigation and media scandal generated waves. The Ministry of Health initiated an audit of private hospitals for abuse. Banking sector tightens rules on trust management of accounts patients. Now video recording of conscious consent and confirmation by an external notary was required. Journalists fed on these news until the next sensation, but for Faith the main thing was something else. Behind the figures and memoranda, no more human lives were lost. Each report was accompanied by real stories of people who no longer had will take away the license in the morning. She saw Igor only once after the trial. He came to the fund to clarify the payment details. Vera took him to a meeting room where a glass wall overlooked the Auden garden. The leaves seemed to copper coins, slowly fell onto the wet path. He was thin, his hair became in short, grey hair appeared on his temples. He spoke quietly, without his former or a comfortable self-confidence. "I'm applying for a job as a financial analyst in a small company. The salary will be modest but stable. I'll start making payments next month." She nodded and wished good luck and added that she was glad if he found peace. He looked out the window, holding the folder with both hands. He uttered a phrase that was not an excuse, but rather a statement. Lived for a breakthrough, but the breakthrough turned out to be a failure. Vera did not comment. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words. As he said goodbye, he said, "Thank you for the chance compensate, even if it can't be fixed." She watched him as he reached the elevator, and when the doors closed, felt light. It wasn't a stone falling from my back, but rather a quiet, a faded note that was long overdue for release. December brought snowfall. The flakes fell in whole clusters, covering the city with a soft white silence. Vera walked along the artist's descent after the late program of the charity auction, with their coats wrapped around their waists, to the rustling snow grains that clung to the hair and melted as soon as they touched the skin. From behind footsteps were heard, quick but not alarming. Sasha was catching up with her, holding an umbrella that someone had found in the cloakroom of an auction house. Without a word, he opened the umbrella above them, and they went deeper into the soft light of the lanterns. The silence was cozy. The city as if he was slowing his breathing, giving them space. Vera noticed Sasha looking at her out of the corner of her eye, as if trying to see if she could take his hand. She decided to help. Fate leaned her head on his shoulder. And this was the beginning of a new novel with fireworks about the history of trust, where every morning you choose not to sleep on Eve. They reached the embankment. Water darkened under the lace of ice. The illuminated ice floes quietly collided from a vinyl. The probe was no longer needed. The snow had subsided. Sasha removed it, inhaled the cold and said slightly hoarsely, "You know, fear is sometimes like a dream in the dark, but it's worth lighting a tiny light, and it becomes clear that in the corner there is just a coat, and not a monster." Vera smiled and repeated quietly, "The main thing is not to put out the flame." They stood on the very edge of the granite parapet, and the new year loomed ahead not as a starting point, but as a spacious perspective. The history of Faith is not a chronicle of revenge or a guide to the dark corridors of corruption. This is a chronicle of awakening, when one night in the silence of a ward a small piece of paper with the inscription "Don't fall asleep, Beggy" turned from a warning into a manifesto. She showed how quickly money and love can change places if the value life is valued in rubles or square meters. But she proved it, that the ability to keep your eyes open is the most unsellable currency. All that what happened to Krylov, Igor, bank officials is important for the system, but what is more important is the internal shift. The woman who was being made weak for someone else's benefit refused play the role of an object, and became a subject that changes the rules. The foundation of the right to wakefulness is alive because everyone who invested at least 100 rubles there, I saw in the history of Faith my own hidden fear of falling asleep under someone else's responsibility and chose to wake up. And what about love? It is neither a savior nor a trap. It is a space where two people say to each other, "I see you awake, real, not reduced to a convenient format." Sasha and Vera had not yet called their feelings by name, but it was enough for them to know, if one night the alarm bell rings again, there will be a hand nearby which will not let you fall asleep. Maybe this is the main result. Wakefulness is not a state I, but the choice of the heart, to which you can always return. You just have to open the door and let the morning breeze in. New spring began as if on a breath. March was warm. The asphalt had not yet had time cool off from the rare frosty nights. And in the office of the Right to Stay Awake Foundation, 6 a.m. the lights were on. Vera and her team were preparing to launch the National Registry Deceive Patients, a platform where anyone could check the clinic and bank for the interweaving of dubious schemes. The work was in full swing in the lab before the publication of the landmark article. Some wrote signature verification algorithms, others deciphered paper files into digital format, while others filmed short explanatory videos. Vera felt every cell of her body respond to this pace. Recently she would have collapsed into fatigue, but now it was as if she was absorbing energy straight from the air. Sasha appeared closer to 7, carrying 2 cups of black coffee without sugar. He placed them side by side on the edge of the table, without saying the banal good morning. Instead, he quietly commented on the nightly medical news. The day before, Gemma magazine published a fresh analysis of the complications of barbiturate squatting, and it fit like a puzzle into the argumentation of their project. And again between them there flickered that barely perceptible is once called falling in love. The touch of glances, the synchronous breaths, when they reached for the same folder at the same time, and short smiles that appeared for no apparent reason. By the end of the first quarter, the fund entered into an agreement with 4 insurance companies. Now, if a patient signed a policy with their logos, the insurer automatically assumed legal protection against unlawful deprivation of legal capacity. Vera signed the documents trembling, not from uncertainty, but from the scale. The tool, invented last winter in the toxicology department, was gaining capitalization weight, measured billions of rubles protected. Sasha, meanwhile, passed the midterm exams, and when the dean awarded the best freshman with letters of thanks, his name was among the 3 leaders. After the ceremony, he returned to office, still buttoned up in a strict medical gown. And Vera, just then I noticed that his shoulders had become stronger and his smile had become calmer. Youthful timidity, responsibility, but along with successes, resistance also grew. In mid-April, a high-ranking official came to Vera. A dry man in an impeccable steel-colored suit. He introduced himself as a consultant for private medicine, although in his folder there were obviously papers from the security services of a large holding company. He spoke softly, but intonation gave off a cold tone when he proposed reorienting the fund to less high-profile topics in exchange for a solid financing. Vera, without showing that she was doing something about the visitor's imaginary title, asked who exactly he represented. He evaded, saying, "Those who do not want war, but prefers partnership." At that moment, Sasha, passing by glass conference room, caught a shadow of tension on Vera's face and, entering the room, already as an assistant, he laid a printout of the latest statistics on the table. The number of requests from victims exceeded 5,000, which made the fund socially significant and possessing media immunity. The consultant read the numbers, tapped his knuckle on the edge of the table and slightly squinting, he said, "The louder you become, the more noticeable the counter-pressure wind will be." Vera smiled and replied that she knew. Any wind only fans the flame of truth, if there is enough brushwood by the fire. The man left, leaving a business card without a name, only phone number and QR code. 2 days later, a cyber attack began. The foundation server was hit by DOS traffic. The hackers then tried to plant fake records of non-existent patients to discredit the registry. The IT team fought off the waves like a hockey playoff. But by evening the situation had become critical. User access was slow, the hotline was crackling. Vera, feeling the tension pressing on her temples, called an emergency meeting right away. In the common room of the loft, 50 specialists of different profiles, nameplates, cups marked "Don't fall asleep." Screens where red indicators flickered nervously heart rhythms. Sasha took the floor. Over these months, he had improved in cybersecurity no less than in anatomy. He proposed a parachute maneuver, instant mirroring of the server to a secure cloud platform university, but this required access to the mines, and they were held by a contractor who was vacationing in the Dominican Republic. While the IT specialists they argued, Vera called the rector of the medical university personally, and 20 minutes later technical support inserted an academic cluster filter into the attack stream. The green LEDs began to blink steadily, the attack dispersed like a wave. Stone Pier. The team sighed, applauding, but Vera, looking at the voices in chat, already built the next outpost. If someone dared to hit, then the blow will be repeated. At night, when the corridors were empty and the server hum was replaced the steady hum of the air conditioner, Vera lingered by the window. Outside the glass the street glistened with wet asphalt. The cars thinned out, the trams clicked like distant clocks. Sasha, having finished checking logs, brought 2 glasses of tea with Melissa, handed one to her. Vera did not feel fatigue as an enemy. On the contrary, she felt a proud warmth. Even if the world squeezes the ring, here inside the power grows, because nearby are those who hold network hands in hands. In that silence she confessed in a half-whisper that she was afraid only one to turn into an obsessive figure for whom work replaces breathing. Sasha looked at her seriously and said that this is what he is behind. Not to let her forget about the usual things: cinema, bike rides on Saturdays, pancakes with jam. He added smile that he could make her a program of practical psychogenetics. And they both laughed, because even laughter was on the edge, as after a long struggle, when the victory has not yet been formalized, but already in the air. May exploded with lilacs, and the Foundation launched a mobile application. Now the patient could photograph each power of attorney, and the algorithm instantly checked the doctor's signature against the database of known violators. The pilot was launched in 10 regions. Television invited Vera again. This time to a talk show on primetime, where she, sitting opposite the chairman of the Association of Private Clinics, argued about the boundaries of responsibility. The opponent tried blame her for destabilizing the market, but Vera offered statistics. Each the revealed fraud saves the MHIF budget millions in disability compensation. In the evening, when the broadcast spread across social networks, the number of downloads of the application jumped 4 times. And the Foundation received a short email without a signature. Congratulations, you have exceeded expectations. We accept the rules of your game. Vera, while reading, I didn't understand whether it was gratitude or a warning, but the feeling of risk became as familiar as a pulse. Meanwhile, between her and Sasha, drops of attraction were gathering in a trickle. They still haven't named the feelings, but the fact is simple. Heartbeat. In the evenings she caught herself waiting for his step outside the door. Framed to catch the eye. It lingered a second longer than needed to transfer the file. Their correspondence at night veered from security protocols to Mandelstam's poems and hummus recipes. All this testified, life, unfettered by fear, blossoms into multilayeredness. One day, after a particularly heated discussion of the latest report, Sasha led her to an open window where buzzing noises of Ostrovsky Prospect, and quietly said, "There is a moment when the adrenaline is running high, and it is difficult to distinguish. We together because we fight or because..." He didn't finish, but he didn't remove his hand. On the contrary, the fingers lay on top of her hand. Vera began to look for a rational explanation. Past trauma, mutual aid syndrome, but caught myself. Too, for a long time her feelings were examined under the magnifying glass of other people's manipulations. Now she has the right to let them just be. She squeezed his hand in response, and the city, the noise of which burst through the door, sounded as applause for their silent agreement. But the shadow of the past made itself known unexpectedly. In June, Igor's lawyer filed a lawsuit to appeal part sentence, citing new circumstances. They say that Igor could not understand the harm, since he was suffering latent depression, diagnosed after the fact. The court ordered a re-examination, and Vera again found herself in a labyrinth of courtroom corridors. She felt a mixture of anger and fatigue rising inside her. The wound seemed to have healed, but the thread was pulled again, and she began to ache painfully. Sasha volunteered to accompany her to meeting. Even sitting in the hall, he pretended to read a textbook. But every time, when Igor cast a guilty glance in Vera's direction, Sasha raised his eyebrows slightly, like a shield. The court, having studied the arguments, upheld the sentence. But Vera needed 3 weeks of hard waiting to understand. There are no closed doors. All it takes is for someone to try to flinch material. That night she returned home at 12:30, opened the window, I breathed in the warm air of the June shower, and for the first time in a long time I cried, quietly, silently, letting the tension flow out. In the morning, Sasha, noticing the reddened eyes, did not ask questions, but simply brought a blanket and suggested taking a boat ride along the canals before work. A normal walk at 8 a.m., when the streets are not yet overcrowded with tourists, became the best antidote. Sitting on a wooden bench on the foredeck, Vera watched, like golden angels of bridges reflected in the water, and thought, the pain does not disappear, it becomes part of the horizon, but if you walk, the horizon recedes. By August, the registry platform has been launched nationwide, and the Ministry of Justice has invited Vera to join the expert council on the reform of the Institute of Powers of Attorney. She was tasked with proposing a mechanism of notarial control for patients in sedated state. At the first meeting, where at a long table there were elderly professors, officials, and insurance representatives sitting, Vera noticed how difficult it is for the old system to accept the voice of the civil sector. But she was listened to because behind her back there were numbers and human stories. When she told the stories of 30-year-old Maria from Nizhny Novgorod, whose relatives knocked out consciousness with phenobarbital in order to rewrite the house, grey-haired the academician with the emblem of the gas commission on his lapel side and wrote something down in his notebook. So, step by step, the project acquired a legitimate face. Vera increasingly thought about the future in which her personal history will cease to be an exception. She imagined how in 5 years the fund will become unnecessary because the system will learn to defend itself without external crutches. She shared this dream with Sasha, and he nodded, already dreaming of his own future neurologist, who would use neuroprotectors without the risk of selfish manipulation. And one day he said, "You know, someday I will open a department where patients will sign not with paper, but with an electrode, confirming that the brain is awake and no lawyers will be needed." Vera laughed, agreeing to finance such a project, if by that time the fund's available resources are truly freed from urgent need. September brought a sharp wind and the first serious test for their relationship. During Vera's trip to Samara for a conference, a fire broke out in the local data center where the backup was stored copy of the register. Sasha stayed in St. Petersburg on duty and went 3 days without sleep coordinated the recovery. When Vera, exhausted from the flights, returned, she was met by a pale but shining Sasha. "Backupsel, the data did not leak." He tried to joke that in life of the fund, as in a hospital, you stand with a defibrillator until the rhythm is evened out. She responded, without thinking about the looks of her colleagues, pressed herself against him in the airport lobby, and this gesture turned out to be the first public seal of their relationship. The newspapers, fortunately, were interested in other scandals, and the love story of the foundation director and the medical student remained within the bounds of friendly rumors. But for Vera it was an important step, to stop hiding life behind the camouflage of business will. At the end of the year they together wrote a strategy for Wakefulness 2030. The plan was to transform the fund into an international network with branches in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. Vera spoke about patient rights in her presentation to the Board of Trustees. Understand every pill he takes. Sasha, standing at the screen with diagrams, demonstrated a prototype of a portable electrophysiological sensor that confirmed cortical activity. When the applause died down, one of the investors asked with a grin, "Friends, what will happen if the problem disappears in 5 years? What will you work on?" Vera looked at Sasha, and he answered without looking at the cheat sheet, "That means we will celebrate. The world has reached a point where the patient is safe. And then we'll find a new border, where they still sleep in the dark." The investor's ironic grin was replaced with a respectful nod. On New Year's Eve, Vera's studio began to look like a home for the first time. A candle was burning on the windowsill. It smelled of cinnamon and mulled wine. There was a monitor on the wall, a map of the world glowed, with circles marking regions with no registered cases of abuse. Vera and Sasha were sitting on the carpet, listening to the chimes from the laptop speaker. And when the hands converged, they froze, as if afraid to frighten the quiet magic. Their pace life sank at that moment to the simple human rhythm of inhalation and exhalation. Vera raised a glass of pomegranate juice. After the hospital, she hardly drank alcohol and said, "I never thought that at 33 I would be raising a toast to the right to stay awake." Sasha grinned, put his hand to her cheek and whispered, "The main thing is that we don't forgotten about this right to simply live." She nodded, feeling like 30 million, concrete walls, hospital corridors and courts stretch beyond the horizon. Ahead a slow dance of freedom, where every movement depends on how reverently they will hold each other in the light so that the shadow will never again prevail.